My brother was sitting across from me at my grandmother's dining room table, smiling the way he always smiles when he thinks he's already won. I remember the smell of that room. Old cedar and lavender. Gran had kept a sachet of dried lavender in the top drawer of her sideboard for as long as I could remember, and even after she was gone, the smell stayed. I sat there in her chair, the one she always called the good chair, the one with the slightly uneven leg that she'd chimned with a folded piece of cardboard for 23 years. And I folded my hands on the table and I waited. My brother, who I'll call my brother because that's the most generous thing I can call him right now, had flown in from Calgary 2 days earlier. He'd shown up at the house with his wife and a rolling suitcase that was, I noticed, already half filled with things from Gran's china cabinet. I didn't say anything. I'd been practicing not saying anything for a long time by then. Let me go back a bit because none of this makes sense without the beginning. My grandmother raised me, not entirely. I had a mother, technically, in the sense that there was a woman who gave birth to me and then spent the next decade cycling in and out of our lives, whenever she needed money or a place to stay. My father left before I started school. Gran stepped in. She always stepped in. That was who she was. A woman who saw a gap and filled it, quietly, without making a fuss about it, without ever asking for anything back. My brother is 11 years older than me. Different father, same mother. By the time Gran started raising me in earnest, he was already out of the house, already building his life. He visited at Christmas. He called on her birthday sometimes. He remembered to send flowers when she had her hip replaced. He was, by the standard measure of things, a decent grandson. What he was not was present. He didn't sit with her during chemo appointments. He didn't learn that she liked her tea with exactly 1.5 teaspoons of honey because sugar gave her headaches. He didn't drive 3 hours in a February ice storm because she'd called at midnight, confused and frightened, and he was the only person she felt safe calling. That was me. I did all of that. For years and years, that was me. I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me. I'm telling you because it matters to what came next. Gran was organized the way people of her generation often are. She had a will drafted in 2019 through a lawyer named Richard Okafor, a man she trusted completely and had used for everything from her property taxes to the sale of her summer cottage in Muskoka. The will was clear. The house, a 3-bedroom in Scarborough that she'd owned outright since 1987, went to me. A modest investment account was split evenly between my brother and me. Her jewelry and personal effects were itemized specifically. Everything was clean, documented, witnessed, notarized. I knew this because she'd told me, not in a dramatic deathbed way. Just one afternoon over tea, about 8 months before she passed, she'd sat down across from me and said, "I want you to know what I've arranged, so there aren't any surprises." She slid a copy of the will across the table. I read it. I told her she didn't have to do that. She said she wanted to. We didn't talk about it again. She passed in March, quietly in her sleep, which was exactly what she would have wanted. My brother arrived for the funeral wearing a suit I'd never seen before. Expensive. New. He hugged me at the door and said, "We'll get through this together." His wife stood slightly behind him with an expression I couldn't read. The weeks after the funeral were administrative. Death is surprisingly bureaucratic. I was handling everything, notifying her bank, canceling her subscriptions, sorting through 50 years of paperwork in the back bedroom she'd used as an office. When my brother called and said he wanted to be involved in settling the estate, I said, of course. That was my first mistake, though I don't think I could have done anything differently. She was his grandmother, too. Saying no would have looked cruel. He asked if I knew the name of her lawyer. I gave him Richard Okafor's number without thinking twice. 3 weeks later, Richard called me. "I need you to come in," he said. "There's been a development." I drove to his office on a Tuesday afternoon expecting paperwork. What I found was Richard sitting behind his desk with his hands folded in an expression that was carefully, deliberately neutral. My brother Richard explained, had contacted him with a will. A different will. Dated 2021, 2 years after the one I'd read at Gran's kitchen table. In this version, the house was split equally between my brother and me. The investment account went primarily to him. There were other changes, smaller ones, that consistently nudged things in his direction. Richard handed me a copy across the desk. I read it. I spent a lot of time in the years since trying to describe what that moment felt like, and the closest I can get is this. It felt like the floor had gone soft. Not collapsed, just soft. like the ground had decided it wasn't entirely committed to holding me up anymore. "Is this real?" I asked. Richard was quiet for a moment. "That's what I need to determine. I want to be precise here because the details matter." Richard had three concerns. First, the signature on the new will looked like Gran's signature, but something about it was slightly off in a way he couldn't immediately quantify. Second, the notary stamp on the document was from a notary who had retired in 2020, a full year before the document was supposedly signed. Third, and most critically, Richard had been Gran's lawyer for over a decade. If she had wanted to update her will in 2021, she would have called him. She always called him. She had never once used another lawyer for anything. I drove home and I sat in my car in the driveway for a long time. Here's something about me that I haven't mentioned yet. I work in compliance. Specifically, I'm a regulatory compliance officer for a mid-sized financial firm in Toronto. I spend my days reading documents, identifying irregularities, understanding exactly how fraud works from the inside. It's not glamorous work. It's careful work. Detailed work. The kind of work that teaches you to look at things very, very closely. I called Richard the next morning and told him not to file anything, not to act on the document, and not to contact my brother until he heard from me again. He agreed. I think he'd already come to the same conclusion I had, but he was professional enough to wait. Then I started digging. I won't go through every step because some of it is still legally sensitive, but here's what I found. My brother had hired someone to produce the document. The notary stamp was photocopied from an old filing and digitally altered. The signature had been traced from one of Gran's birthday cards, the kind she sent every year, with that distinctive looping lowercase g that she'd had her whole life. The paper itself had been artificially aged, a technique that's apparently not as difficult as you'd think if you know where to look. I also found, through records I was able to access legally as a named party in the estate, that my brother had significant debt, not surprising debt, a mortgage, a car payment. I mean, serious debt. 2 failed business ventures, a line of credit that had been extended 3 times, a pattern of borrowing against every asset he had. He was, as far as I could tell, drowning, and he had decided that Gran's house was his life raft. I felt a lot of things during those weeks. Grief. Obviously, I was still in the early stages of losing her, and now I was spending my evenings reading fraud statutes instead of crying, which maybe wasn't the healthiest coping mechanism, but it was the one I had. Anger, which came in waves and then receded and then came back harder, and something else, something colder and more focused, which was the knowledge that I had to be careful. If I moved too fast or too emotionally, he'd have time to cover his tracks. I spoke to a litigation lawyer. I gathered my documentation. I contacted a forensic document examiner, a real one, a retired RCMP document analyst who now worked privately, and paid for an independent assessment of the forged will. Her report was 16 pages long and unambiguous, and then I waited for the estate meeting. My brother had proposed the meeting. Just the 2 of us, he'd said on the phone, to work through everything and figure out what makes sense going forward. He'd suggested Gran's house, which I thought was interesting. He wanted to do it in her space, on her ground, in the place he was trying to take. I agreed. I told him I'd have some documents for him to look at. I didn't tell him I'd also called Richard Okafor and asked him to be present. I didn't mention the forensic document analyst's report. I didn't say anything about the fact that I'd forwarded the relevant materials to the Ontario Provincial Police's fraud unit 2 days before the meeting and spoken at length with an investigator there. I arrived early. I sat in the good chair, Gran's chair, the one with the shimmed leg, and I made myself a cup of tea with exactly 1.5 teaspoons of honey, and I waited. My brother walked in at 2 o'clock with his rolling suitcase again, which told me everything I needed to know about what he thought was going to happen that afternoon. His wife was with him. She stood just inside the front door with her coat still on, which, in retrospect, I wonder if she already knew this wasn't going to go the way she'd been promised. He sat down across from me. He smiled. He put a folder on the table. "I think we should talk about Mom, about Gran's wishes," he said. He always called her Mom when he wanted to seem close to her. He'd done it at the funeral, too. "I've been going through things and I really think her intentions were clear." "I agree," I said. I let him talk for about 4 minutes. He laid out his version of events carefully. Gran's changing wishes in her final years, her concern about me being so young, her desire for fairness. He was good at it, he practiced. There was a warmth to it that might have been convincing if I hadn't already read the forensic analyst's 16-page report. When he finished, I slid my folder across the table. "This is the notarized original from Richard's office," I said. "Dated 2019, witnessed by two people who are both still alive and have already given statements. This is the document Gran and Richard discussed, in person, in his office, and then Gran brought a copy home and showed it to me over tea on a Thursday afternoon in August." My brother looked at the folder. He didn't open it immediately. "And this," I said, sliding the second document across, "is the forensic analysis of the document you submitted. The one with the retired notary stamp. The one signed on paper that was artificially aged. The one where Gran's signature was traced from a birthday card." His wife made a small sound. Not a word. Just a sound. My brother looked up at me. The smile was gone. Something moved across his face that I'd seen before. The look of someone recalculating very quickly, trying to find the exit. "Renata," he started. "Richard is in the kitchen," I said. "He drove here this morning, and the investigator from the OPP fraud unit I've been working with has a copy of everything already, including the analysis and the original will. They've been very clear about what the next steps look like from their end." The room was quiet. I want to tell you that I felt triumphant. I want to tell you that in that moment I felt some clean, clear sense of justice. Something that matched the size of what he'd done. But that's not what it felt like. What it felt like was tired. Just tired all the way through. He tried several things in rapid succession. He said it had been a misunderstanding. He said someone else must have prepared the document, that he hadn't known about the irregularities. He said Gran had talked about updating her will, that he was just trying to honor her wishes. He said I was making a mistake. I didn't argue with any of it. I just sat in Gran's chair and I let him talk and I waited for him to stop. Richard came in from the kitchen. He'd made himself tea while he waited. He later told me he'd found the honey easily, because Gran had always kept it in the same spot on the second shelf for as long as he'd known her. The conversation after that was short and mostly legal. Here's what happened, because I know people want to know. My brother was formally charged with fraud over $5,000 and document forgery. In Canada, document forgery under Section 366 of the Criminal Code carries serious weight, particularly when it involves probate fraud. His wife was not charged. I believe, based on everything I observed, that she genuinely hadn't understood the full extent of what he'd done, though I'll never know that for certain. He pleaded guilty 8 months later as part of a negotiated resolution. He received a conditional sentence of 2 years less a day to be served in the community, along with a significant fine and a requirement to repay legal costs. The house is mine. It was always mine. But there's a difference between something being legally yours and having it feel like yours again. And that took a long time. There's a particular kind of grief that doesn't have a clean name. It's the grief of losing someone and then discovering in the weeks after that the version of your family you thought you had was never quite real. I'd known my brother was distant. I hadn't known he was capable of this. Those are two very different things to sit with. I still live in the house. I've repainted the front bedroom and replaced the kitchen faucet that Gran had been meaning to replace for 2 years. The lavender sachet is gone now. It finally lost its smell. But I know which drawer it was in, and sometimes when I open it, I check anyway. The good chair is still in the dining room. I shimba-legged myself with a new piece of cardboard, folded the same way she used to fold it. Not because it needed it. It didn't need it. I just wanted to do it the way she did. Some things you keep, not because they're practical, but because they're yours and because the person who taught you how to do them is gone, and doing it their way is the closest you can get. That's all it is. That's all. There's a thing that happens after something like this, after the documents are filed and the charges are laid and the house is legally, officially yours. People expect you to feel settled. Like the paperwork closes something. It doesn't. What I kept coming back to, in the weeks after that meeting, was the rolling suitcase. My brother had walked into Gran's house with a suitcase already half-packed with her things. He hadn't waited for a verdict or a conversation or even a moment of shared grief. He'd just started taking, and I think that's when I understood that what he'd done wasn't a desperate decision made under financial pressure. It was a reflection of something that had been in him for a long time. The debt explained the timing. It didn't explain the choice. I've thought a lot about what Gran would have made of all of it. She wasn't a person who talked about fairness in abstract terms. She just did the right thing. Consistently, quietly, without needing recognition for it. She showed up. She kept her word. She maintained her integrity even when it cost her. And it sometimes did cost her. She wasn't naive about that. She just believed that the way you move through the world matters more than what you get from it. I learned that from her, not from a book or a class, but from watching her fold cardboard under a chair leg for 23 years rather than just buying a new chair. What I've come to think is that my brother's plan failed not just because I caught it, but because of when I caught it. I'd spent years in compliance work learning to read documents carefully, to look for what didn't fit, to be patient with detail when impatience would have been easier. That's not luck. That's something you build, slowly, through discipline and genuine attention. Gran built it in me without either of us realizing it. The forensic analyst, Richard, the OPP investigator. None of that mattered if I hadn't known how to sit still and be methodical when every instinct was telling me to panic. And I think about what it took to not confront him early, to not call him screaming the night Richard first showed me the other will, to gather everything quietly and completely before letting him walk into that dining room believing he'd already won. That took something I'm not sure I fully had before Gran died. A kind of steadiness, a willingness to delay the relief of reaction in favor of the weight of doing things right. He made his choices out of desperation and greed and, I think, a belief that I wouldn't be capable of outmaneuvering him. That belief was his real miscalculation. Not the forged document, not the retired notary stamp. The assumption that I was still the kid sister he'd never paid much attention to. I'm not. I live in Gran's house now. I open that drawer's house now. I open that drawer sometimes and I check for a sachet that's no longer there. I fold cardboard the way she folded it. Small things. But they remind me that the kind of person she was, honest, careful, present, is something worth protecting. Worth becoming. That's what I'm still working on. That's what I think we're all working on, whether we know it or not.